Whoa, hey there guys! Welcome to the video. Today we're going to be talking about Kirby Air Riders, and I'm going to be predicting the full roster for when the game fully releases, so let's get into it. So just a little while ago, Sakurai did a presentation on Kirby Air Riders showing off some of the new details on the game, including one of the big things was that there's a selectable roster for you to choose from. In the original Kirby Air Ride, you could play King Dedede and Meta Knight, but they didn't have access to all the carts that Kirby had access to. But in this game, they said that all the characters that you'll be able to select will be able to use copy abilities, and they'll also be able to get off their Warp Star and choose different vehicles to use. So today we're going to run through who I think will be showing up in the Kirby Air Riders full roster. Before we go into the predictions, let's go over the current roster so far, because I based a lot of my predictions based off of what we're seeing so far for the playable characters. So first off, we have Kirby, King Dedede, and Meta Knight. Returning characters, but now King Dedede and Meta Knight will be able to play just like Kirby does with copy abilities and being able to change their Warp Star they're on. Then the new characters are Bandana Waddle Dee, Waddle Doo, Chef Kawasaki, Knuckle Joe, Gooey, Cappy, Starman, Magalore, and Susie. And each of the characters are going to have different abilities and different special moves. As you can see below me, it says Kirby has no clear weakness, and it also mentions the Ultra Sword, which is his super ability. For some of the characters, I might have an idea of what this might look like, but some of them I might not share it just because I didn't come up with an idea. I just thought the character would be pretty fitting for Kirby Air Riders, and I'll let Sakurai do the rest, you know? So, with that out of the way, let's go into who I think will show up in Kirby Air Riders. As you can see on the character select, there's already 12 characters announced, and based on the screen space, I'd say that there's room for maybe 3 or 4 more rows. So I went ahead and chose 15 characters that I think are likely to show up in Kirby Air Riders, leaving one spot for that random icon that's there, or maybe that's an unlockable character icon, and I've been duped. But my first 3 characters for the predictions are going to be Rick, Kine, and Ku. If you're not familiar with Rick, Kine, and Ku, they debut in Kirby's Dream Land 2 as supporting characters to Kirby, where you can kind of team up with them, and they're able to mimic your copy abilities with Kirby to get like a double team-up effect type of deal. And they also return in Kirby Dream Land 3, and I think they showed them as Kirby Star Allies and whatnot. But these are 3 of Kirby's friends. I feel like, in Mario Kart, you always expect Mario to invite his friends, right? So in Kirby Air Riders, why wouldn't Kirby invite his friends? Also, I think that these 3 are all characters that have used copy abilities in the past, or at least like benefited from the copy ability, right, by teaming up with Kirby. So I think it's realistic that, have them being worked into this game. They all would make sense, like being able to. I know Kine's a fish, right? So maybe he wouldn't be able to walk around, but he'd flop around to a new cart or something like that, right? And then Ku and Rick, I feel like are pretty straightforward, right? Ku can fly because he's an owl, and Rick's a hamster, I think, right? And he'd just obviously be able to walk around. But I think it would make sense. They all get copy abilities. They all are able to walk around and stuff like that. And like I said, it's 3 of Kirby's friends. And I know it's 3 characters from basically like one debuting game. But I think that these 3 are iconic enough that they would all deserve to get in. The next character I have written down is Elfilin. So I think Elfilin makes a lot of sense because Elfilin's from the newest Kirby game, Kirby and the Forgotten Land. There's also the Star-Crossed World game upgrade for Switch 2 coming out soon, which will have new content. I assume Elfilin will be important in that. Or maybe there'll be a new character introduced, and maybe they'll have some tie into Kirby Air Riders. But Elfilin's Kirby's friend in Kirby and the Forgotten Land, so I think it makes a lot of sense that he would show up here. Also, a lot of these characters that I have on my list show up in Kirby Star Allies as allies for Kirby to play with, right? But Elfilin, being a newer character, didn't have the chance to be in that game, so I think it makes a lot of sense for Elfilin to make their debut into a Kirby spin-off with this one. The next character I have down are the 3 Mage Sisters from Kirby Star Allies. Now, the reason that this is 1 character instead of 3, like Rick, Kine, and Ku, is because I think Rick, Kine, and Ku are different enough where they could be their own characters, whereas the 3 Mage Sisters are kind of identical other than the magic they cast, right? So I think that this could just be a palette swap. We've seen on the Kirby Air Riders website that there are indeed palette swaps for this game, and we've seen Meta Knight get changes to his model a bit, with Dark Meta Knight and the Galactonite changing his mask and stuff. So I could see them maybe going for a model swap, where you're able to swap between the 3 different sisters. I don't know how that would affect their abilities, or maybe like their super move would be they all come in anyway, so it wouldn't really matter which one you're playing. But I think that this would be a good addition to Kirby Star Allies, because they're a more recent enemy, and then they become an ally, and I mean, that's how most Kirby enemies work, but, it's just a more recent example, and I believe they showed up in Kirby the Fighters recently, so I think that they haven't, like, forgotten about this enemy or anything, and I think that if it's just 1 slot, I think it's perfectly fine. I don't know if I need them taking up 3 slots in the roster, but I think 1 slot, and it's just either palette swaps or model swaps or something, and they all, or maybe they could just have them all work together. Maybe all 3 of them are on the Warp Star or something. But either way, I think the 3 of them showing up would make a lot of sense in Kirby Air Riders. The next character is Adeline from Kirby 64. I hope I pronounced it right, otherwise I'm going to get yelled at in the comments. But Adeline, I think, makes the most sense for a Kirby 64 character. I really like Kirby 64 personally, so I would love to see any representation from this game. I feel like it gets a little bit forgotten in the modern times, but that game was a lot of fun, so I think Adeline would just make the most sense from that game. And since characters don't have copy abilities in this game, I think it'd be cool if Adeline could have, like, her easel up on the Warp Star she's on, and instead of having, like, you know, like a copy hat like Kirby does or something, she could be painting it off the easel, right? So, like, for her animations, you know, if she has the fire power up, she's, like, painting a fire, and then it shoots it out, right? Instead of being, like, you know, where Kirby just, like, sucks up the fire, and then he breathes it out, right? Something like that I think would be pretty cool, just animation-wise for Adeline. I think it would make a lot of sense. And, of course, I feel like the painting would play into her special ability and her super move and stuff that we've been seeing from the characters. So that would be my rep for Kirby 64. Next up is DeRoach from Kirby Squeak Squad. Squeak Squad's another great Kirby game. I think that DeRoach, obviously being like the leader of the Squeak Squad, would make the most sense as a character from that game. They could maybe give him color swaps to match some of the other members of the Squeak Squad, right? But I don't think they would ever do like a full skin, or maybe his super move as he calls in the rest of the Squeak Squad. The only reason I was hesitant to include DeRoach on this list is because I was really excited to see if there'd be a city trial event where like the Squeak Squad charges in. Like, imagine the Squeak Squad music hits and they all charge in on the city trial map and they start stealing all of the like upgrades and stuff that you can pick up, or maybe they just run into you and they start stealing it from you and stuff like that. I think that would be super cool. Of course, they could still do that without DeRoach leading it, right? They could just have all the other Squeak Squad characters show up and do that. But that was like why I was hesitant to include him, but I think it would be I would just love to have him as a playable character. He would be super cool. I feel like obviously they could give him since characters have different stats and stuff, they could give him an advantage towards like flying and stuff. I feel like that would make a lot of sense. And then maybe even, like I said, his super move he could call in the Squeak Squad, right? If they don't, I mean, I guess they could do it if they include him in City Trial anyway, right? Just have multiple Squeak Squads running around, right? What's the problem? But either way, I think he'd be a super fun character to have. I have very fond memories of Squeak Squad, so I think he'd be a very welcome addition to the game. The next 3 characters are bosses and or enemies that are, like, they are reappearing bosses or enemies, right? So I feel like they're a little less likely just because there's so many to choose from in the Kirby games. But as we can see on the roster, there's like Knuckle Joe, there's Waddle Doo, right? There's Cappy, there's Starman, right? So those characters showing up makes me feel like there's going to be maybe a couple more generic bosses or enemies. So the ones I went with were Bonkers, the mini boss that has the big hammer and throws like the nuts that stun you and stuff. I think to me, he's a very iconic mini boss, right? Like I feel like I always see him in Kirby games, and I feel like he's just I don't know, to me, I always thought he was a cool boss, right? So I think he would just make a lot of sense. We saw King DDD swing his hammer at like nearby riders when they drive by and stuff, so I imagine Bonkers would have a similar ability. And then I feel like his ultimate or like super ability would just be maybe he throws like a bunch of those nut arounds that stun people, and maybe it would like lock up their controls or something, or just stun them for a little bit so they can't drift or turn. And I just feel like he makes a lot of sense because in my mind he's always one of the most iconic Kirby like mini bosses. Then next I have Mr. Freezy, who is the ice enemy who I mean, I think he makes the ice blocks and then throws them at you, but I mean it always really looked like he was pooping them out, if we're being honest. But I think even though he's like associated with Frost, right? And there's gonna be copy abilities in this game, so you could potentially have a Mr. Freezy with fire ability, right? That would be a little weird, right? A little jarring, maybe. But I think he'd be a very funny character to have. He's another one that when I think of iconic Kirby mini bosses, he's one I think of because he was always just like, you know, he always had the funny animations where you beat him and he starts crying, or he like runs and trips in the wall and stuff like that. So I think he would just be a funny little iconic character to have as Air Rider. And obviously for his abilities, you know, maybe he'd throw out ice blocks, or maybe he'd have some, you know, just freezing abilities, right? For his super move or his abilities, or he'd throw out ice blocks and stuff like that. So that's why I went with Mr. Freezy. Next up is Poppy Bros. So Poppy Bros, I believe they're Senior and Junior, right? Because I think Junior is like the regular enemy and Senior is like the boss. But they're pretty much identical, I think, so you could add either or. But I think that this is another one where it's just a funny Kirby character I feel like a lot of people would recognize, and it'd be cool to see them in Air Riders. Obviously, their abilities could probably tie into throwing bombs. I know bombs are usually like something you can pick up in City Trial and stuff, so maybe just a smaller version of that or something for his ability so that he can still do that, and, you know, there's still that item in the city trial and stuff like that. But I think he's just a funny, silly character that a lot of people would recognize, so it would make a lot of sense for another enemy character that they could add in. Now, the next character, I'm kind of like 50-50 on whether they'll actually be playable or not, but the next character is Marks. So, obviously, I feel like Marks is a very fan-favorite character, right? It would make a lot of sense if he got into the game, but also, I feel like in recent Kirby games, like, they always leave the fans wanting him, right? I don't know, so I feel like it's possible that maybe he'll show up as a like boss or something, or like a world event in City Trial, right, or something like that, and maybe they won't make him playable. Of course, just because they show up in City Trial, I don't think means they wouldn't be playable, but this would definitely be a cool one, like the little marks on the ball as a rider, right, and then have like boss marks show up over the City Trial map. I'm sure they could, you know, it's up to what Sakurai wants, right, but they could definitely do both, but I just feel like they always leave people wanting Marks, right? Like, I feel like people are always like, oh, Marks is coming, and then he doesn't show up, right? So, I don't know. It feels like a true 50-50 to me, but I think if he did show up, a lot of people would be really happy. Now, for the last four, I went with a little more out there or wacky choices, just because it seems like there's only room for maybe 3, maybe 4 rows. So I figured the last 4, I'd get a little silly with it, just because I'm not even sure if there will be that many characters in the game. Who knows? Maybe there's a whole nother page of characters, and this will be really wrong. But I went a little crazier just for the last row, just to get, you know, just to get a little silly with it, right? So the first one I have up is at the end of the Air Riders trailer, we saw what looked, to me anyway, looked like a new form of DDD that's like maybe fused with like his whatever he's riding, right? It looked like DDD with like a blue like exhaust coming out of one of his eyes and stuff. I thought it looked like DDD. I know some people have been speculating other things, but to me it looked very much like DDD. Like, you'd almost see his crown and stuff coming out, and like the general body shape seemed like DDD. You'd almost like make out his coat, and it looked like he had his gloves on and stuff. So I assume it's a new form of DDD, and that's what I'm going with. Is I think that one of these characters will be the final boss DDD. I imagine that it'd just be super cool to have him playable if they're doing like a cool new final boss thing. I feel like it would just make the most sense to have him be playable after you maybe beat the story mode or whatever the requirements would be to meet him. Maybe he's a city trial event or something. I feel like just make him playable, right? Why not? Why not? After you encounter him, make him playable. Now this next one, I think like it contradicts a lot of things I said earlier, like, oh, they could show up as a boss, they could show up in city trial, this and that, right? But the next one is Wispy Woods. I know that there's even like a tree. We saw a tree with a face on it in the city trial, of course, right? But I don't know why. I've always really liked Wispy Woods, right? He's always a fun and memorable, like, first boss or first, like, real boss, right? And I think it would be hilarious if we could see him riding, like, a Warp Star, right? Like, I know that there's the problem of, oh, hey, he has to get off the Warp Star, right? I don't know, have him walk around on his roots or something, or have him, like, burrow like a tree, like, where his roots are moving and stuff. I don't know, do something silly with it. I think Wispy Woods would be a hilarious addition. I think it'd be super cool to play as Wispy Woods. You know, they could give him abilities where, like, the apples fall out of his head or something, or he starts, like, blowing the riders nearby him around or something, like, blowing them away. So, obviously, like I said, much more silly predictions, but also I would love to see Wispy Woods. I think it would be hilarious if you could play as him in this game. Now, the next two I have are actually collaborations, which I don't know how likely that is that shows up in a Kirby game, but I just think, like, Sakurai working on the game, plus him working with Bandai Namco on the game, I feel like these two are at least somewhat plausible, and I feel like it would definitely... Some people who might not be interested in the game already might pick it up because of this. So, the first one I have is Pit from Kid Icarus, right? Obviously, Sakurai being really loving that franchise, being a huge part of it, of course. Right, so I feel like that would be, and I feel like Pit wouldn't be too out of place in like Kirby Air Riders, right? Like, I don't know, I could imagine seeing Pit riding a Warp Star and you know, jumping off, switching carts or whatever, doing all the races and stuff. I feel like that's not too out there, right? Especially because, like, I mean, Kirby and Pit have had interactions in like Subspace Emissary and Brawl and stuff like that. So I feel like it wouldn't be too crazy of an idea. Obviously being a collaboration within Nintendo, of course, so I also feel like it's not too unreasonable, right? Like, I feel like they could, if they want to do that, they very well could. It's just whether or not it will happen. Obviously, I feel like collaborations are not a huge thing in Kirby, right? But who knows? This could be the first one. And then the last character I have, this character's been making the rounds in terms of collaborations, so I think that this character could definitely show up. It's just whether or not Nintendo or Sakurai or whoever's in charge of making these calls would be okay with them showing up. Once again, like I said, I don't know how they'll feel about collabs or like collaborations with other companies in Kirby Air Riders, but I think Pac-Man. I think Pac-Man would be we could have Kirby be our big pink blob, right? And we could have Pac-Man be our big yellow blob. Well, you know, he has a little more features, right? But Pac-Man's been like kind of revitalized recently, right? There's been the repack games. He got a Tekken stage, Tekken 8 stage, right? And he's just been showing up. I think he's even in Sonic Crossworlds, right? So I don't know. I don't know if there'll be bad blood because he was just in a Sega game. I don't know with Sonic Crossworlds, right? But either way, like I think Pac-Man would just be a very funny character. Obviously, his abilities would make themselves, right? Like he'd just have he'd have an ability where like he goes forward and eats like power pellets, and he just starts he like his cart just becomes him just chomping like the 2D Pac-Man, right? Stuff like that. I feel like it would be a very, very cool thing to see. And obviously they like Kirby and Pac-Man are both in Smash Bros, of course, so it's not unheard of, right? I don't think like they have any problem with like Kirby and Pac-Man being seen together or anything like that, right? So I don't think there's any issues with it. It's just whether or not they would do collabs in Kirby Air Riders. Something I forgot to mention a second ago was I didn't mention any of Pit's abilities. Obviously, I feel like Pit would have a lot of abilities to choose from, so they'd have a lot of freedom with that. And I feel like in City Trial, or maybe just as his ultimate, it would probably make sense as his ultimate, but if there's a City Trial thing, they could have, like, you know, you had the Dragoon parts where you could find, like, the parts and build up the legendary air ride machine, of course, right? What if they did that with, like, a lightning chariot or something? I don't know. I'm not a K-Chris fan, admittedly, but I feel like doing something like that would be kind of cool. Just have, like, have Pit be a crossover character and then, like, have the lightning chariot be, like, a crossover, like, legendary vehicle or something. I think that'd be, like, pretty silly. Of course, it could just be his ultimate or something they do with that, but it would be I just think that, you know, more opportunities for, like, cooler crossover stuff, I think would be super welcome to the Kirby Air Riders, because the game's already silly enough. Like, it's a Kirby game, right? Sakurai talked about plenty of times in the presentation, like, oh, you know, that's pretty silly, isn't it, right? So, you know, have some fun with it, right? Add some crossovers, add some new vehicles from crossovers, right? Add some new characters. I think that'd be a lot of fun. And that's all my characters for today. So I mean, honestly, I think this is a pretty solid roster. I personally would be very happy. Obviously, I came up with the list, right? So there's definitely going to be some personal bias in it with the characters that are on there. But I would personally be very, very happy with this. Well, let me know what you guys think. Would you guys be happy if this was the roster? Do you guys think this will be the roster? Who do you think will show up if not these characters? And do you think there'll be a collaboration? I don't know. I think that would be super interesting. You know, I mean. At even one point, I was thinking, like, what if did, like, a Hello Kitty collab or something? That'd be, like, a way out there, especially with there being no history of collabs in Kirby games, really. But I don't know. What do you guys think? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and I thank you all for watching, and I hope you guys enjoyed my predictions. And maybe we'll see. Maybe they'll all come true, or maybe I'll be very, very wrong. But thank you all for watching, and I hope you guys enjoyed the video.